all to the CAA show. My name is Jaggi the C. CAA is conversations and analysis of hot button issues that affect us all. Today, it is my privilege to have on my show a decorated soldier who has excelled both on the operational and thinking battlefield, a man who played a pivotal role in peacekeeping missions for the United Nations in former Yugoslavia and Northern Iraq, the former Vice Chief of the Indian Army, the GOC in C of the Western Command, a man, I say, who is an officer and a thorough gentleman, the former Vice Chief of the Indian Army, Lieutenant General Philip Campos. General Campos is a man who does not sit easy on his laurels. After his retirement, the Ministry of Defense appointed him as chairperson of the Tri-Services Committee to review the security of defense installations. That report has not only been submitted, but implemented as well. So, as you can well imagine, he is absolutely the right person to answer all questions about these current drone attacks in Jammu. So, welcome to the conversation, General Campos. It's a pleasure having you on this show.
Thank you, Jaggi.
Yeah, great. So, General Campos, let's start right off the bat. The first big question: what's going on in Jammu? After you submitted that report, and I believe that important report has not only been implemented, it's now in place in all our security installations all across the country. And if I can compliment you, General, that because of your pioneering effort, infiltration is really down. Human infiltration is really down. But at the time when you wrote this report, when the implementation was taking place, did you envisage that electronically drones and other such things would get through our security perimeter? How would you analyze the scenario today?
See, the background to these drone attack could well lie in the implementation of the recommendations of my committee. We submitted our report somewhere in the middle of 2016, and it took about a year and a half to 2 years for implementation of this report. But what has happened as a result of implementation of this report is that terrorist groups from across the border have found it very difficult to infiltrate onto our side of the border and attack our military installations with relative ease, as used to happen in the past, and it also happened at Pathankot, which triggered the committee of which I was the chairperson. So once that committee report got implemented, and it was not only this committee report, simultaneously, the Home Ministry was also conducting a review of the security of the border fences and things like that to prevent the border being intruded upon. So a combination of both these committee reports, once it took effect on the ground, the result was that terrorist organizations found it very difficult to infiltrate and get onto our side. So over a period of time, over the last, I would say 3 years or so, you would have yourself noticed that you don't hear so often about, one of those attacks like Pathankot or Nagrota or Uri, which used to happen quite often in the past. So what does it change the terrorist intention? When he finds that he can't come through, does he change his intention? No, because his intention will still remain that he wants to keep the J&K pot boiling, and to that extent he will continue to attack defense installations, because that gets him maximum publicity and support, and hence he will look now for better ways of getting across the border and for movement within the Indian areas. And that is how I feel that the next step, which I'm sure our security agencies would have predicted long ago, that with the surface routes being blocked, that is the land routes and the maritime routes, which took him to Bombay, with these routes more or less being blocked, the only other way he could come in was using the aerial route to bypass the border fence as well as to bypass the obstacles and checkpoints en route, as also the perimeter fencing and other technical protection which are now which have now been implemented in all the defense installations.
So, General, again, as I said, compliments, and to your far thinking, to you envisaged this scenario. And I think it was in 2016 on New Year's Day when the Pathankot attack took place. And I think I had a conversation with you long back where you said that you're in the midst of formulating this report and it has yielded wonderful dividends. But now, as you rightly said, that we are in a new phase right now. The drones have now been unleashed on the Indian state. So the first thing is, how worried should we about drones, number one? Number two, do they have the same kind of potency in terms of causing damage as, for instance, a human infiltrator or a terrorist who sneaks across the border? And thirdly, I'm just asking you these sub-questions because they're all linked to the main question, that do we have the capability to have an anti-drone kind of technology to stop these drones, or if necessary, to unleash our own drones in enemy territory?
See, the drones have come into warfare good about 3 decades back. So, and over a period of time, initially they were all meant for more passive uses like surveillance and reconnaissance. And over a period of time, armed drones got introduced, maybe 15 years back, starting with the Americans. And then it has been picked up by many other countries. But what we saw in the Middle East, in Syria, the use of these drones by terrorist organizations against the state forces like the Russians or the Saudi oil fields. Once these attacks were successful, they gave a lot of publicity and ideas to these terrorist organizations that this was one more weapon which could be used. The Indian Defence Forces, I'm sure, have been watching this and have been drawing the right lessons. I'm sure efforts are underway to procure armed UAVs, that is unmanned aerial vehicles, even for the Indian military forces, as also to deal with this drone threat in terms of counter drone systems which can be employed. So I'm not privy to what exactly is happening today, but this could well be happening. The DRDO has been trying to develop some of these systems. I'm not too sure how much of success they have achieved. But what is significant about this attack is these were very small, simple drone systems, which are, as I can see, they would have been something what we call off-the-shelf drones, which would be used in the civilian side for delivery of goods and for e-commerce and things like that. So what has been used is a very simple device, and to that extent, the challenges are there. That for a simple device, it is more difficult to sort of pick up because it operates at very low levels, and also it doesn't emit those signatures which can be picked up by normal counter drone systems. But so one thing is these are simple small systems. Number two, they failed in doing what they were supposed to do in terms of causing some destruction or casualties on our side. This did not happen. But it is good that it happened and it didn't cause any casualties, because that serves as a wake-up call to our security establishment that it is time to review our entire systems and see what is it that we need to include now or incorporate in the existing protective systems, and where can the counter drone systems be brought within that. So that is what I presume would already be happening in terms of reconfiguring systems and incorporating systems, reviewing to see what should be done immediately to make sure that the immediate threat of these drones are sort of countered. And what has to be remembered that, like I said, this was a simple system, a simple drone. In future, these drones may be more sophisticated, may be more lethal. So to that extent, we have to be prepared for that eventuality and make sure that whatever we are preparing for, we make use of this wake-up call and we prepare for these worst-case scenarios.
So actually, you kind of, I think, partially answered my next question, which was that are these incursions, and we are all agreed, you're absolutely correct that these are crude, these are low technology devices, but are there probes for something bigger to follow, for some kind of a bigger eventuality which could hit us? That's the first thing. And the second thing in general, an important point, we all know that, for instance, if a fighter aircraft were to intrude in our airspace, or for that matter, anybody's airspace, that's not only a huge wake-up call, but that is termed as hugely offensive action. So should we treat a drone incursion on the same level as an enemy aircraft incursion and respond accordingly?
See, I agree with your general contention that we should not take it for granted that this is a very small intrusion, a very small device, no casualties, so it doesn't mean much. I would say that as a security practitioner, what would be happening on our side is that we would look at all the range of possibilities which has caused this sort of incursion. Why now? Why is it, after all, these copters, quadcopters have been available off the shelf for many years now? What has caused these quadcopters to be used for this sort of attack, carrying an explosive payload, coming over a defense installation and dropping it? Why have they done it? Other than the reason that I've given you, that having failed in other ways to reach these targets, they've used this. But is this a diversionary measure? Is it something that causes the Indian security establishment to start paying disproportionate sort of attention onto this flank? As you know, our military has been extensively involved in Ladakh, in the northern, against our northern neighbor. And to that extent, is there any game being played that suddenly you activate the Western Front and in terms of attention of our security establishment, and possibly even in terms of allocation of resources? Every time you do a review of your defense installations, a lot of funds go into putting those additional checks and balances to plug the loopholes which are found. A lot of money has already been spent in bringing up the defense security of defense installations to some standard. Could it be within the range of possibility that an effort is being made to divert your attention and make you deploy more resources towards dealing with such a threat? Because the money for this would come from the same kitty, which is meant for modernization of the defense forces. So is it some sort of a sort of ploy, something to draw your attention and to draw your resources and take it away from where it is causing more concern to the adversary?
Yeah, because generally, if you remember that even when before the full-fledged, the Chinese incursion which took place during the summer of last year, before that they were coming to pasture lands. They were coming, probing, They were doing all kinds of things, and then they would retreat back. So these incursions were happening on that front also. So you're probably right that these could be the precursor to something which is bigger. So that begs an important question, General. What about our budget outlays? What about our the entire budgeting for these activities? First of all, if I can ask you in that particular sphere, that are you happy? Are you satisfied with the budget which has been allocated for the perimeter defense, which the report which you submitted? Because now I think that has been implemented, and in future, if we have to block, if we have to control the infiltration, do you think we now have the budget in place? The resources are there in place?
See, my report was submitted in the middle of 2016. I would be aware of only what I see in the open domain. And I know for a fact that in early 2018, when there was a terror attack in J&K, the government had announced a certain package, close to 1,500 crores, to beef up what had already been given in the previous 2 financial years, to beef up the funding of implementation of security measures for the defense installations. So my presumption is that if these funds have been used correctly, and I have no reason to suspect otherwise, by now the security installations, the defense installations, not only those which are closer to the border, but those who are even far from the border, I'm quite sure that by now the security or protective measures are fully in place. And when I see something like this aerial attack taking place, I get the impression that definitely those measures must have been implemented correctly, because he is unable to use the land route anymore, or even the maritime route anymore, and he has now to resort to the aerial route to try and get across the obstacles en route to these defense installations.
So that's great to hear this, General, because it kind of reassures all of us that the scenario is under control, that we are on top of the situation, as it were. So let's now move away from the drone situation to the overall security situation in the country. We, of course, have been through a very harrowing time on the Ladakh sector. We all know what has happened out there. Now, there have been certain reports, and I don't know if these reports are verified. I was checking about these reports from some other site, that some divisions have been moved from the Pakistan front, from the Western front, and they have been moved to the Ladakh sector. So, do you feel that we are kind of at the moment a little vulnerable vis-a-vis the Pakistanis? We might have bolstered our defenses on the Ladakh and on the Arunachal side and those sectors. But what about the Western front? Are we kind of in control of things out there?
See, I have not heard of what you were saying about the move of Pakistani troops. It has happened, but it is not recent. We had all heard about it last year. We are not sure about the veracity of those reports. But rest assured, the Indian Army is well capable of dealing with the sort of threat that came about last year and is sort of continuing even today. I'm sure whatever troop movements have taken place last year in terms of reinforcing the Ladakh sector towards our borders with our northern neighbor, as well as making sure that when these activities are taking place, we do not create any vulnerability on the Western front. I'm sure those have been taken note of, and I'm not privy to whatever may be happening in terms of troop movements. But please be assured that the Indian Army and the Indian Armed Forces are well capable of dealing with any threat which can manifest on any of our borders at this point of time.
Great. Absolutely great to know that, General. Now, we keep hearing of this concept of the two-front war. I mean, this has been going on and on and on. What is really your take on this entire, as a strategist? Do you think, is it even possible? Do you think anybody would be foolish actually to engage? because all three countries, China, Pakistan, India, of course, all of us have nuclear arms. Do you even foresee the possibility of a two-front war? And if, God forbid, if something like that were to ever happen, you have reassured us that we are fully prepared. But on a two-front situation, are we prepared?
See, the possibility of a two-front is something which the armed forces have been looking at for a long time. And at this point, I do not, when generally people have been saying that full-fledged wars are not really likely, then I would say the possibility of a full-fledged war, against both China and Pakistan could be happening simultaneously in today's circumstances. I think it is slightly far-fetched. But overall, when we talk of this as a possibility, when we talk of this as a worst-case scenario for which we prepare, as far as the military is concerned, we look at what is the possible threats, how and when can they manifest, and within that scheme of things, definitely the possibility of a full-fledged war involving one or either of our adversaries, and the possibility that if that happens, the second adversary would also join in, is something which has been seen in the realm of possibility, and that has always been part of the planning process. So that much I can say definitely. Yes, it's a work in progress. What we need for our modernization needs have been told to the government. There is an effort to make these funds available. It's a work in progress. It will take a long time. A lot of restructuring is going on. A lot of economy of effort is being brought in to ensure that we are optimizing our efforts, and there is duplication, multiplication of efforts is sort of avoided. All this is being done basically to generate more funds towards the modernization of the military. Okay. And my sense is, as and when these sort of threats actually manifest, by that time, the Indian military would be well capable of dealing with those threats in that dimension. And at this point, whatever is available with us, we are capable of dealing with the type of threats and the level of threats as they can manifest at this point of time.
Okay. I want to take you on a slightly different directions. This is not so much as you wear your experience as an army person, but more as a strategist. What is our threshold of pain? No doubt infiltration has come down, terrorist attacks have come down, but every country has a certain threshold of pain. For instance, Israel, I mean, that's the most interesting example one can think of. The threshold of pain is very, very less, very limited. The moment they are provoked, they immediately respond. They have a very aggressive response system. We all know that. What is India's threshold of pain? How much can we take in? And then, it's like the old saying that India is like this big elephant. Once it gets moving, then it completely tramples everything in its path. What, as a strategist, you think is our threshold of pain?
I wouldn't be able to comment on a question like that, because that's actually a political sort of, the threshold is related to the political authority as to how they discern that they would like to do something more than what is being normally done.
Okay.
I agree with you that in recent times, we have ensured that the other side realizes that there is a limit to what our country finds acceptable. And to that extent, we've had occasion to tell the other side that beyond this is unacceptable. And I think the message has gone across. So I would like to leave it at that.
Okay, absolutely great. Now, Again, I'm just taking a little from away from your area of competence and all that, because these are very interesting questions which are related with defense. But I believe that in the Pakistan scenario, also some back channel talks have been going on with Mr. Doval and other his counterparts from Pakistan. How much of a supporter are you for back channel talks, especially to resolve military matters? What is your take on that particular situation?
I am a person who believes that countries, especially neighbors, should learn to live in peace with each other. And the day you start living in peace with each other and start using the majority of your resources towards improving the condition, the health, the prosperity of the citizens of the country, so much it will be better for all of us. I'm sure that's a sentiment which is carried through even our leadership. And you have seen the efforts made time and again by our political leadership to put out the hand of peace and try and resolve issues. But to go further on this route, both sides have to see the advantages of the peaceful route. We cannot be blackmailed or coerced or threatened by use of terror outfits or terror attacks to bring us to the negotiation table. That is something I don't think the Indian government, the Indian leadership will ever agree to. But like I said, that doesn't mean that we do not want peace. We all know that we want peace, but we want peace to happen in a manner that is long-lasting, and it is based on sound principles, and not that you come up with some hodgepodge agreement and then these agreements break down and you are back to doing what you were always doing in terms of these attacks which are going on.
Okay.
But in recent times, the signals are good, the happenings on the ground are good. We are aware that there is a ceasefire on between both sides on the line of control. The ceasefire has been holding, and the fact that the ceasefire is holding on the western line of control is what gives rise to the talk of back channel talks or talks to ensure that we move forward. It requires both sides to get onto it. I'm sure we as a country definitely want it, and if the other side is also keen and they're willing to do it on terms which are honorable, I'm sure we'll make progress, and the faster we do that, the better.
Okay. I'll take your attention on to another very interesting area which is opening up for us, and that is the Quad area. We are now definitely in not only in the Quad, but we have a now, I wouldn't call a military alliance, but there is now convergence which is happening between the Quad countries. What does it really mean for a country like India? Does it mean that we have to allocate resources for the Quad initiative in terms of especially the Navy, or the Quad initiative can actually come from from within the present budget allocation for what we have right now? And also, how do you see this initiative going forward? Do you see India playing a larger role, an international role, especially in the policing of the Malacca Straits? Where do you think this Quad initiative is really heading, General?
See, the Quad initiative is not only about the Navy or the Indo-Pacific in terms of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. The Quad initiative and the agreements go much beyond that. It is a sort of understanding between four major democratic countries in this region to ensure that peace is maintained in the Asia and the area of the Indo-Pacific, because this is an area which has major repercussions being on the trade routes, the sea lanes that this area needs to be at peace. And to that extent, for quite a few years now, there has been an effort between these four democratic countries to sort of see common ground and bring about a sort of meeting of the minds and a common purpose to establish peace, peace and security in this area. No doubt, it means resources, because when I say it is not only something about the waterways, it is also about the land mass that extends all the way, I would say, from the Persian Gulf right up to Australia. So when you are looking at this large area within which on the southern side we've got the three members of the Quad, and the fourth member coming in from outside, who has got a major presence in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean also. So when you see this, you realize that it is not only the waters, it is right across the entire Indo-Pacific region, which includes the landmass. So when we talk of resources, it is not only the resources of the Navy, it is also the resources of the entire military. It means modernizing the Indian Army, it means modernizing the Indian Air Force, it means modernizing the Indian Navy and giving it a blue water reach, which takes it much beyond whatever would have been its normal capability.
So you are saying that
definitely we talked about budget. To achieve that sort of capability, it definitely requires much more resources, and much more resources definitely of the Navy. And to that extent, yes, there would be pressures on the budget. Were we to do it at a pace which sort of ends up in taking away resources from other services or from other heads of the budget. So we have to be careful. There is no doubt there is a huge requirement of resources for modernizing the Indian military, not only in terms of the Quad, but in terms of which way we see India going in the region and globally. So in a 15 to 20 year perspective, if we see India as a regional power, and another 20 years if we see India as a global power, then we are also seeing the requirement of having a modern military, which becomes an essential prerequisite to claim this sort of stature in the region and in the world. So, to that extent, there is a requirement of additional budget for the military, for modernizing the military. And like I said, priorities will keep changing. And definitely at this point, there is a requirement to beef up the Navy.
So, but welcome it, General. I'm saying you would welcome this this initiative, in the sense you think this is actually a part to modernization of our forces, and in the overall run, in the long run, actually this would be a good thing for the Indian military.
Yes, in a matter of speaking, but I would put it that it is a sort of congruence of Indian national interests with the interests of the global community, the democratic community, the Quad, in ensuring peace in these areas. And like I said, there is a congruence. Whatever we do to strengthen the Quad will also strengthen the Indian military and vice versa. And to that extent, whatever happens in the Quad in terms of exercises which are conducted between members of the Quad, naval exercises which are conducted, or operations which are undertaken like anti-piracy operations and things like that, all these will sort of improve your capacity as militaries to do your conventional role also in a better manner. So whatever is happening at the moment, these are all positive developments as far as India's security is concerned. And to that extent, the more we train, the more we equip our forces with more modern weaponry and equipment, not only does it make us more secure, but it also enables us to achieve our regional and global aspirations on a long-term basis.
That's great to know. General, we're almost at the end of our conversation, and I just cannot let you go without asking you a question, which again is looking in the future. And I'm asking you this question because of your experience. You have been a very important part of these peacekeeping missions. I mentioned in my introduction also in Yugoslavia, Northern Iraq. I'm now looking in the future because we all know that Afghanistan is in turmoil and nobody really knows what's going to happen out there. But assuming tomorrow there is a need for a peacekeeping, a multinational peacekeeping force in Afghanistan, if such a thing would ever to happen, do you think we should have boots on the ground in Afghanistan when the time for that comes? What is your, this is a last question and your quick response from you.
See, I wouldn't like to give a definitive answer on this, but I have seen the discussion which took place within the military and what we heard was happening at the higher levels at the time that we were envisaging a role in Iraq post the Iraq war. There was talk about the Americans inviting brigade-sized force or even a larger force, a div-sized force from the Indian Army to take over some security of some part of Iraq.
Okay.
It was a serious sort of request, and I know the views within the military and at that time within the political establishment was divided.
Okay.
There were people who saw merit in going into Iraq at that time, and there were people who felt that it was going to be a quagmire and that if we were to step into this place, and mind you, that was a time when the American army was incurring lots of casualties on the ground, a very disproportionate number of casualties. And so people felt that you'll get stuck there, you'll have a lot of casualties, and you'll wonder as to why you went in. And so finally, a decision was taken and conveyed to the Americans that India would prefer, for its own reasons, not to participate in the Iraq war. Not to get on to Afghanistan. I feel, in a way, it's something similar. Only thing is, Afghanistan is a neighbor of ours.
Correct.
And there are problems of accessibility through the land route as well as through the maritime route. So if we were to put a force there, it cannot be a very large force. And to that extent, we have already put in security elements to protect our own assets in Afghanistan. This is what we have done over the years. And we have ensured that the signature has remained small so that it doesn't sort of invite violence in whatever was happening in Afghanistan. In today's conditions, we can foresee what is going to happen in Afghanistan with the Americans pulling out. I think, firstly, it is too early to speculate as to whether Indian troops should go in, what should be their role. If I were to answer it off the cuff in trying to have a broad sort of futuristic look, I would still feel that it is better to be avoided. But it is a decision which I suppose, if it is taken either way, it will happen much later, and by which time a lot of things may have changed on the ground. So to that extent, it may be better to talk about Afghanistan and the prospects of Indian troop deployment by waiting some more time and seeing how things, whether they change on the ground or they don't. And either way, it has major repercussions.
Wait and watch you are recommending, General. Just then in one word, I just want an answer from you. Because here, this is the contradiction which I find. At one level now we are engaging with Quad, which is an internationalist role to a certain extent. And then as we have discussed Afghanistan also. But do you feel going into the future that the role of the Indian Armed Forces is going to change eventually if you are aspiring for a regional power, if you are aspiring to be taken very, very seriously in this part of the world? Then we might have to step outside our shores and start, going into areas which are beyond the reach of or out of India. You think that is an eventuality which might happen in the future?
That sort of eventuality will happen. When I say that India aspires to be a regional power, India aspires to be a global power, and seek its rightful role in the Committee of Nations. When I say that, it is also presupposing that India would have resources to deploy to protect some of its interests in the region and the world. And when we talk of that, that is the context, what I was talking in terms of modernizing our forces. Modernizing our forces and making it capable to do what the country wants to do.
Right.
When it comes to something like Afghanistan, the decision whether to deploy there or not should be based on what Indian interests are.
That's right.
And not based on what Quad interests are. Quad has not matured beyond a point at the moment. Till recently, till a year back, India, we as a country, were hesitant because we, as you know, we have a neutral sort of approach to all countries, especially our neighbors. And to that extent, we did not want to commit ourselves to the Quad in a manner that it shows that we are willing to change our normally non-aligned or neutral stance towards other countries. More recently, because of the security situation, we have been more accepted, we are willing to accept the Quad and being part of it. And to that extent, we have been more active in some of our responses to requests from the Quad, and also attending events of the Quad. But I still feel that if there is a requirement to go into Afghanistan at any stage, and whichever way the decision goes, it should be based on what Indian interests are and not what Quad interests are. And to that extent, we are still not looking at the Quad, at least I can say as a layperson who's following the news, that we are still not looking at the Quad as an alliance of countries. We are looking at it as countries, democratic countries who have come together with common values and common democratic interests for the betterment of the region and the world. And to that extent, we are committed to the idea behind the Quad. But would that make us do things which normally military allies would do, as it used to happen in the Cold War period? I don't think it will happen, at least in the foreseeable future.
But as you also said that going ahead, we don't know what's going to happen, but at the moment, Indian interests are paramount, and I completely agree with that. We have completely run out of time, General Campos. This has been a absolutely enlightening and a wonderful discussion. We have touched on so many topics, and you have shed light on so many issues which actually worry countrymen all the time. So thank you so much for joining us today, and it was absolutely wonderful having you on the show. And we'll come back later at some other date when new developments take place. Thank you once again, General, for joining with us.
Thank you, Jaggi. It's indeed been a pleasure interacting with you, and looking forward to doing this in the future too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.